Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Essay. Today we are gonna see what if Issei played host to a legendary vampire queen. Part 1. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Does that boy feel different to you? Yes, he does. Something is ominous about him. Smells like blood. I don't like him. 3 people stood still in the middle of a crowded school hallway, watching another who was several meters away. Their quarry was a brunette boy who, other than his red t-shirt and open blazer, looked just like any other average Kuo student. That's just Issei Haidu, though, right? Like, the pervert. He's not new or anything, the oldest member of the trio said, brushing a stray black hair out of her face. The boy tripped over a shoelace, stumbling and luckily recovering just before he face planted. He gave a half-hearted chuckle before resuming his walk, rubbing the back of his head in embarrassment. As far as I know, yeah, that's just him. Unless he's awakened to sacred gear. The only boy between the 3 of them rubbed his chin and thought. He smells like blood, the smallest one and only first year repeated, sniffing the air with a deadpan. While the hallway was crowded, no one was paying the 3 any mind, and even if they did, most wouldn't have a clue what was being talked about. After all, they were only humans. Mostly. I guess we should tell Rias. Someone running around with a sacred gear unlocked without realizing it would be bad news. Or even worse, he has already realized it. He still stinks. Issei, do you have anything to add? Huh? Issei looked up from his desk in a daze, quickly realizing all eyes were on him. His literature teacher, a rather uncouth man in his 40s, had just called on him in the middle of a lecture while he'd been blissfully napping on his desk. Issei wiped a tendril of drool off the corner of his mouth, then looked at the board. Nothing immediately jumped out at him, so he was a little lost. What was the problem, again? You're sleeping in my class, is the only problem here, Mr. Haidu. I was asking if you had anything to add about vampires in Western myth, since you're so enthused about the lecture. Oh. Right. I knew that, huh? So? Do you know anything about vampires? Yeah. I guess. A surprised grin graced the face of the uptight literature teacher. Oh? Do tell. Like something specific? Sure. Why don't you tell us why vampires don't like garlic? Issei started to say he didn't know, but then perked up like he remembered something or like he heard something. Well, actually, that's a myth, he said, looking a little surprised himself. He hissed after he finished the sentence, as he was unable to stop himself from spilling a few beans too many. The teacher, noticing his hesitation, was quick to interject. Please, go on. I think we're all intrigued to hear what you have to say. Well, garlic is a natural anticoagulant, so vampires used to spread rumors that it would ward them off when in reality it just made people easier to drink. Issei looked like he himself didn't really know where he'd come up with that fact. After a moment of silent consideration, the teacher laughed out loud. Well, it seems like someone read Twilight one too many times. Putting that obviously false trivia aside and moving on. Geez, don't call on me if you're gonna ignore what I say. Prick. What allowed? To call our history false. Thou shouldst leave this place of learning immediately, 'tis obviously incorrigible. A childish voice, belonging to someone obviously no older than maybe 10, spoke directly into Issei's mind. He answered in kind. Tell me about it. Why are you awake so early, by the way? Also, what the hell was that? Is that really why people eat garlic? Indeed, 'tis a seasoning most welcome to our kind. And I am awake because I am awake. Wow, very comprehensive. Many thanks, my lord. That was sarcasm. What's am? Don't pretend to not know what sarcasm is. Thou hast clearly lost thy mind. I invented the art. Issei ignored the voice coming from his mind as he laid his head back down on the desk. The sun was out, and that meant he was tired, and that meant he would sleep, whether the teacher liked it or not. The slow drone of the teacher's voice was like a lullaby to his ears, sending him to sleep before he could even realize it. The next thing he heard was the school's over bell, and he was on his feet before his brain even caught up. Without really acknowledging anyone or anything, he let his feet carry him out the classroom and into the hallways, aiming to go home, but he got a strange vibe, like someone was staring a hole in the back of his head. Issei glanced around, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. There's likely nothing. Thou art as Friday as they come, shouldn't you be more paranoid? You know, since you used to be literally hunted for sport. Sport? Pa, I was hunted for necessity. What a terrifying sentence. My master, could thou do me a favor? Sure. What's on your mind? Remind me of thine ultimate goal. My ultimate goal? Do you even have to ask? Smirking, Issei flung his right hand to the side and pumped his left hand in the air, in a pose straight out of a Shonen anime. I'll become a harem king. Issei proclaimed this most honorable ultimate goal to the highest heavens, not really caring who was around him. Haka. Truth be told, I hadn't forgotten. I merely like seeing thine enthusiasm. If I recall, my former thrall had something of a harem himself. Of course, 'twas more common in that era than feudal Japan. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. But that, he kept walking, the odd feeling dismissed from his mind. He figured it was just a kendo club girl giving him the stink eye from around some corner or something. He didn't really know why they hated him so much. After all, aside from being just a tad bit perverted, Issei Haidu was the very picture of a perfect gentleman. Take care, my master. If thy head should swell any more, thou will likely fall over and perish from the impact. Gee, thanks. Issei spoke out loud, but by this point the crowd was thinned enough that nobody really heard him. Everyone was heading home, with a few club goers here and there being mostly the only exceptions. As he left the school grounds, he kept sparing glances this way and that, trying to pinpoint the source of the odd feeling. Nothing ever stood out. After several minutes of walking silently, Issei came up on a bridge going over a road. It was his normal route home and was normally empty, but this time there stood a lone girl in an unfamiliar school uniform facing his direction and looking more than a little nervous. He initially didn't pay her any mind, but once he got a little closer it became more and more clear she was waiting for him. Issei Haidu? Yeah, that's me. Have we met? Issei asked her that, but he knew they hadn't. After all, he'd remember meeting a chick with such a rockin' bod. She was short but not too short, had black hair that came down all the way to a slim waist, with a bust to die for. She's totally hot. 5 tenths on a good day. No. My name is Yuma Mono, from another school, and I was wondering would you go out with me? Issei's mind ground to a halt. This chick was asking him out on a date. Go out? Yeah, next Sunday afternoon. Can you do it? Sure, that sounds great. I can do it anytime you want. It's a date then. Have a good evening, Yuum said, practically skipping away. You too. I really am happy you're my boyfriend, she said, turning back towards him once more before leaving entirely. Ditto. Issei clenched his fists and yelled out in happiness. A date. A date. This is badass, I'm so gonna see lady parts. I am the man. Hey. Master, yes. While I may seem a beacon of righteous forgiveness, even I have my limits. Screw you, that girl is gorgeous. Was slightly above average at best. And to agree to a date, right in front of me no less absolutely despicable. I'll buy you some donuts. Well, I suppose thou do want to be the harem king. Very well, I shall allow it in exchange for 3 golden delicious. Deal. Issei was almost home now, a skip in his step when once more, he felt the odd feeling of someone staring at him. This time, he whipped around, aiming to catch whoever it was in the act, only to find absolutely nothing. What the hell? He vigorously rubbed his head in frustration, miffed at being unable to get rid of the sensation. His senses were leagues above any normal humans, and he shouldn't have been able to have a false alarm, so to speak. He was understandably annoyed. A little upset that he couldn't find what was bothering him, he spared one more cursory look around the empty Kuo Street and continued on his way. Hey mom, hey dad. Issei dropped his key into a bowl next to the door before taking off his shoes and fully entering the house. Welcome home, Issei. How was your first day back at Kuo? Issei's mom was hanging up a painting she'd bought on a whim of a postmodernist take on the famous Starry Night, where all the stars were partially blurred out because of light pollution. She'd found it at a garage sale, but she wouldn't ever admit that to anyone. Having finished placing it, she stepped off the little ladder she was using and gave Issei a hug. Meet any girls? His dad was sitting in a chair reading a newspaper, in typical dad fashion. The headline on the front read Kuo track destroyed in vandalism attack. A very much smaller line on the bottom was circled and read need a housekeeper. Maids at an excellent rate. But we'll gloss over that. The bespectacled man absent-mindedly flipped through the for sale section while he awaited a response. It was boring, but guess what, I got a date. The silence that hung over the living room was deafening. Not so Starry Night fell off the wall, and Mr. Haidu's newspaper found itself dropping to the ground. A date. His parents cried out in unison, euphoric at the prospect of their definitely not porn-addicted son finally getting with a 3-dimensional human female. Yeah. Her name is Yuma, and we're hanging out this weekend. Oh, this is so exciting, our son finally got a date with a real girl, Juzo. Mickey, has the day finally come? Will he graduate to being a man instead of a porn gremlin? Mickey and Juzo Haidu embraced and held hands, looking in each other's eyes like they'd just been married. Oh honey, I think this is the happiest day of my life, Mickey whispered, tears in her eyes. Hey, screw you both, I was gonna get a girlfriend at some point. And isn't the happiest day of your life supposed to be your wedding day? Issei shouted in exasperation. They hadn't really thought he would be a porn gremlin his entire life, right? Don't ruin this moment for your mother. Juzo yelled back, his wife now full-blown crying in tears of happiness. Ugh. Issei, annoyed at his parents' completely warranted lack of faith in him, stomped up the stairs to his room on the 2nd floor. Can thou really blame them? Thou art most certainly perverse. Why, thou only rescued me because of my bust, magnificent as it were. That's not true. And yes, I can blame them. Issei opened the door to his room and closed it behind him, then flung off his blazer and book bag and slumped onto the bed. I suppose. Hey, master. What is it? Dost thou suppose that girl is something? Something? You mean like us? Indeed. I spent most of my time on this world alone, but in my travels I came across many supernatural creatures. Unfortunately we're both too weak to detect them, but I suspect that girl may be one. Wait, what? Issei sat up, not really believing his ears. Don't me, you little brat. You met other supernatural creatures, like what? Oh, plenty. Angels, demons, a rather disagreeable mix of both. Demons and angels are real. You don't think you should have told me sooner. Thou art a living, or rather, unliving and breathing quasi-vampire, and thou hast the gall to ask if angels and demons walk the same earth as we. Of course. Well, I guess the old fart did mention gods and dragons that one time, but I didn't think there was even more than that. Wait, and that girl could be one. You couldn't have said that before I agreed to go out with her. Issei flung a throw pillow at his shadow, annoyed. It bounced harmlessly off the wall. HMPH. Thou seemed preoccupied, and far be it from me to interfere with my master's love life. Issei hissed, having perceived quite a bit of animosity in those last couple words. Like I said, we are both of us too weak to detect the supernatural without seeing it first, but I do advise thou to use caution. Without warning, Issei's door opened. His mom peered inside, concern on her face. Issei? Was that shouting? Are you alright? Yeah. Just porn. Sorry. Nikki cringed, shutting the door without another word. As soon as she was gone, Issei put his head in his hands. Thou art truly a miserable pile of perversity. Says you. You were right, 100%. Yeah, you totally called it. I see. I'm glad I asked you two to keep an eye on him. So what's next? We need to make our preparations immediately. That's all we can do, everything else depends on him. Several days later, I sure had fun today. Yeah, this was the best date ever. It was just becoming evening, and the sun had finally dipped below the horizon when Yuma led Issei to a nearby park. They walked side by side, and occasionally Issei's hand brushed against Yuma's and made his heart race. Dude, I think this is my chance to make a move. Issei, taking the initiative, wrapped his hand around Yuma's. He grinned like an idiot, but barely got the chance to enjoy it before Yuma let go of his hand and ran forward, stopping just in front of a large and beautiful fountain before turning around to face him. Can I ask you a question? In honor of our first date, there's something I'd like you to do to commemorate this special moment. Yuma walked slowly forward until she stood just in front of him. Sure, you can ask me for anything at all. Yuma grinned darkly. Would you die for me? Sorry, what did you say? Something must be wrong with my ears. Issei rubbed his right ear, not really believing what he just heard. I don't think I heard you right, could you maybe repeat that one more time? I said, I want you to die for me. Issei didn't even have time to react. Yuma stepped backwards, and her clothes flew off as if ripped from her, revealing everything while she simply smirked. Breasticles. Those are boobs. I'm looking at boobs. My little boy eyes have finally grown into manhood. And she's super hot too. Yuma sprouted two black wings, and her common civilian clothes were replaced by skimpy black threads, not unlike the things Issei had seen in some of his kinkier DVDs. What's the old saying? A sight for sore eyes. This is totally a sight for wait, no it's not. She looks like a demon. Issei fell on his rear end, in utter shock at the sight in front of him. The girl who had been Yuma was entirely different, staring down at him with contempt in her eyes. Name's Rainer, by the way. Well kid, I enjoyed the date. And this gift, too, very sweet. Rainer raised her left hand, where a pink scrunchie sat on her wrist. Yuma, wait, even so, it's time to die. But that declaration, she raised her hands, and a spear of red light formed in them. Without even a moment's hesitation, she skewered Issei through the heart. And it was the biggest mistake of her life. The scream, unlike anything the fallen angel had ever heard, pierced the air, so loud she was forced to cover her ears as she fell to the ground in pain. As she looked to the source, which seemed to be Issei's body, she beheld something truly horrific. All the bloody shed flowed into his own shadow, and a figure seemed to be rising from it. Rainer flung another spear into the seething mound, afraid. It did nothing. The spear was consumed, disappearing entirely into the shadow just like the last of Issei's blood. My master bade me sleep, for he trusted you. Rainer's heart leapt into her throat as the figure cloaked in shadow rose entirely, stepping from it like some monster in a fairy tale. Bats whirled around it, and the plant life itself seemed to recoil in fear. The voice that came from the shambling mass sounded like something ripped out of a C-tier horror movie come to life. It was a woman, more beautiful than any Rainer had ever seen, with flowing blonde hair down to her heels and eyes that could make any man's blood freeze. From those eyes, blood dripped down over her face, in the place of where tears would be on any other. I see now, that was a mistake. What are you? Rainer screamed and threw another spear. The woman simply slapped it aside, as if she couldn't care less. I am Kishot Acerola or Iron Hirdenderblade, the iron-blooded, hot-blooded, cold-blooded vampire. I was slumbering inside the shadow of my master, the one who saved me, and for my sealed power to return like this means thou hast slain him. Ye shall not live long enough to regret thy mistake. Raynor immediately launched into the air, fleeing with all her fury. She'd heard the name before. Kishot Acerola or Iron Hirdenderblade was the only vampire to ever reach the top 10 strongest beings through sheer power. This was the king of monsters, in the flesh. Dost thou think to flee? Do not stain thy death with cowardice. Raynor turned around to see Kishot aloft on her own wicked wings and had no time to react before the elder vampire grabbed her right wing and ripped it off entirely. The angel screamed in pain and fear as she plummeted to the ground before landing in a heap, shattering both her legs in the same fountain she'd brought Issei to. Kishot landed gracefully beside her slain master and noticed something slip out of his pocket. It was a sheaf of paper with a strange seal upon it that read "Have your wish granted." Retrieving it, she felt her dead heartbeat once more as a sliver of hope shone down on her. She let a drop of her blood run onto the sigil and it began to shine with a red light. Discarding it near Issei's body, she turned towards her quarry once more. Raynor was sobbing as she pulled her broken body out of the fountain, pleading for her life. Dost thou truly think I'll be so merciful as to spare thee? After thou so shamelessly murdered my other half, my master? No. Only thy death awaits. I could turn into bats and devour ye whole, or set ye alight, or give ye any number of horrific ends to atone for thy sins, but I think a simple death would be most fitting. I will leave thee with only this: thy attempted murder failed. My master will walk the earth again, and I shall rend thy kind from it. Die now, in vain. Raynor screamed as Kishot's golden eyes flashed with hate, and in a single second not just the fallen angel, but the entire fountain and a rather large chunk of the ground were obliterated. Gore rained down over the area, and the only thing remaining of her master's killer was a fine red mist and one battered wing. Ria's Gremory stared on in horror. She'd come through the summoning sigil mere moments after it was used, as planned, but nothing in her entire life could have prepared her to come face to face with an elder vampire. No, the eldest vampire. She'd stepped out of the magic circle beside Issei's body just in time to watch the vampire named Hirdenderblade eviscerate a fallen angel with her evil eye, sending a grotesque shower of blood and entrails and organs all over the park. The devil fell to her knees beside Issei's body. She was going to be sick. Kishot, noticing the one she'd summoned had arrived, turned towards Rias. Judging from that symbol on the talisman, thou art a demon, no. Resurrect him, she said, gesturing to her master's corpse. She slowly approached Rias and the body. Ria's mouth opened and closed, but in the face of such an impossibly powerful being, she couldn't even form a sentence. The aura of death and despair was overpowering her mind, and it took everything she had not to immediately flee. I will not harm thee. The light has pierced his heart, an instant death at that pitiful level of strength. Even my blood will not bring him back now, so I beseech thee. Save him. Please. Kishot's unfazed facade faltered for a moment towards the end of her sentence, and her voice cracked. Then, even through all her fear, Rias understood. Issei must be her child. Kishot knelt down beside him and cradled his body, tears of blood streaming down her face. I can bring him back to life, Rias said, finally gathering enough willpower to speak. But he won't be human, and he'll have to join me as part of my peerage. 'Tis fine. He may hate me for this decision, but 'tis mine to make. Do it. Wake up, or I'll kill you dead. Wake up, bitch, or I'll chop off your balls. Issei awoke with a groan, aiming to slap his alarm clock. He noticed several things, all at once. First, it was very dark in his room. Second, he could still see. Third, he was not alone. In a lot of fiction, when a teenage male protagonist realizes they aren't alone upon waking up, there's generally a girl on top of them. They are not generally on top of a woman themselves. Issei almost jumped in surprise, only to find himself unable to move as he was being coddled by a centuries-old vampire woman, held tightly to her like he was a body pillow. Shinobu, why are you big again? Issei yelled out, trying to free his arms from Kishot's death grip. Are you asleep? Seriously? Wake up. He wiggled and writhed, but then realized something else. Shinobu, in her full Kishot form, had a bust size that was second to none. Issei's mind was immediately blank, as the position she was holding him in had his face right between the twin peaks. Not only that, but her typical red dress was nowhere to be found. And naked. It was at that point Issei's higher functioning essentially shut down. He was being embraced by what was undoubtedly the most beautiful woman to have ever lived, and she was as naked as the day she was born. Be silent. 'Tis entirely too early in the day for us to awaken. The Gukuk Issei made an entirely unintelligible noise as Kishot tightened her four-limbed grip around him, pushing him even further into the valley of heaven. Thou hast seen me naked. We shall have to be wed now, methinks. Issei didn't really want to disagree, but he had more pressing matters at the moment, even more pressing than the two big matters literally pressing against him, to his great surprise. She interrupted his thoughts once more before he could respond. After thou bid me live against my will, thou thinkst he can die so easily. Idiot. I died. There was a pause and Kishot sighed before continuing. Instantly. A stake through the heart has always wounded vampires, but made of pure light and at that weak of a form. Thou never could have survived. 'Twas my fault. The warmth from Kishot's body was intoxicating and Issei found it hard to stay coherent but somehow the memory of dying jogged him into lucidity. I died. Yuma or Raynor killed me. Speak not the wretch's name. Issei felt the distaste rolling off Kishot in waves. What did you do to her? Destroyed her. Without spectacle, without mercy. I did not devour her, as I felt it would disgrace thy memory. Issei didn't even know what to think. His girlfriend, whom he'd had an amazing time with and truly started to crush on had felt nothing. The whole time. And rather than simply ghosting him like most would, she murdered him. But, if you're here and I'm alive. Issei went to move an arm, aiming to feel his canine teeth, and Kishot shook her head in denial. She refused to part with any part of him for even a single moment. Thou art indeed a full vampire at the moment, as am I. But thou art also something else, something not so easily reversed. Something entirely irreversible, I fear to say. Kishot looked away, unable to face his gaze. Thou hast lost thy humanity for a second time, unable to return. It was the price for thy life, I'm so sorry. The first time he'd lost his humanity, it had been her fault. A desperate attempt to rage against the inevitable fate of her kind, to try and stem the growth of the boredom that would lead to her demise, as well as a foolish attempt at suicide, and it had cost him everything. This time, it had been similar. A feeble thing, done of her own selfish volition. He could have died in relative peace this time, but she couldn't live on without him, and so she bid Ria's Grimoire force him to live once more. It's not your fault. You totally saved my life. Issei didn't have a clue what she was talking about, but he knew one thing. Kishot Acerola or Iron Hirdenderblade, known to him as Shinobu Ashino, was absolutely awful when it came to saying how she really felt. For her to literally admit something bad was her fault and outwardly express guilt and sorrow, she had to be crushed inside. Issei pushed himself off of her, addressing her eye to eye. She looked absolutely heartbroken, a state he'd only seen her in once before. I don't really know all of what happened. It's all a blur after we got to that fountain, and I don't remember anything after that bitch transformed. But I do know nothing that happened was your fault. I should have listened to your warning, I shouldn't have trusted her. But I made you stay away. Don't for a second think it was your fault, you hear? Issei stared up into her golden eyes, resolve reflected in his own. She looked down at him and knew he meant every single word, and her dead heart was calmed. Shinobu's eyes watered, and this time she shed a single real tear, not one of blood. Once more she pulled him into her embrace, and this time smothered him completely in her bosom. A smirk graced her face, as she knew exactly what kind of man Issei was, above all else. The true savior, a knight who needs no shining armor. But, secondly, he was a breast man, and breasts she had in droves. Not a single man, alive or dead, in all history, had ever seen her in such a state as this until today, not even Issei had seen her in the nude. But, as both retribution for causing his death a second time and as a late reward for being her savior, she'd chosen to appear this way for him, and only him. Issei, are you awake? You're going to be late. Oh god, oh shit. Issei began to violently try and flee Shinobu's grasp, while his mother banged on the door. What time is it? He hissed quietly to the vampire, who begrudgingly let go of him. It's early morning. I created some drapes to block the windows, as we would both burn in the sun. Shinobu watched him rise from the bed in a clamor, turning on her side to observe him while he floundered to make himself presentable. She cleared her throat, gesturing to her still naked self. Issei had two conflicting instincts, one to drink the sight in and save it to the spank bank, and another to immediately avert his eyes. She laughed, and in a show of power she created a red dress over herself, while relishing his disappointed gaze. Oh, right. She had been reminding him, offering a visual demonstration of what he could do now that he was at full power. Issei followed suit, his skin morphing itself into the typical unfettered Kuo uniform instead of one with a gaping hole and bloodstains. A vampire at their level could shape their flesh into any form they desired, clothing included. Wait, Shinobu. Yes, my master. Issei's voice caught in his throat. It was just a little bit strange, having a woman of such beauty calling him master. Not unlike the things he'd seen in his kinkier DVDs, he vaguely mused. But then he shook his head, dismissing the thought in favor of his actually important question. If I'm not human anymore, but not just a vampire, what am I? He asked a question in nearly an inaudible tone, looking down at the ground. The devil, replied Kishot Acerola or Iron Hirdenderblade. But that chilling revelation, the door opened. Miki Haidu came face to face with something that she never thought she'd see. A blonde woman of immeasurable beauty stood next to her son, towering at least a whole head over him, and wearing an immaculate red and black dress with tall heels to match. Issei's mother fainted. Tell me why we're doing this, again? Because thy new master decreed it so, and without my aid ye'd not last a moment under the sun. Plus, it's quite the jest to watch you be shamed so. It's a lot easier to pick on you when you aren't half a foot taller than me. Issei and Shinobu, in broad daylight, walked together under a large black and red Victorian umbrella. The sun was sweltering even in their portable shade, and it was nearly so unbearable that Issei could ignore the stares of everyone around, but not quite. His hearing was currently impeccable enough to detect the heartbeat of everything hundreds of meters around, so naturally he could hear every word being said. Is that Issei's mom? No way. She's gotta be a supermodel. She's seriously the prettiest woman I've ever seen in my life. Is he holding her hostage? She's like a 12 out of 10. Screw that. A scale up to 10 doesn't even do her justice. Geez, you must be eating this up. Aka, 'twould be a fib to say I wasn't enjoying it. Would it kill them to throw some of that love my way? My self-esteem is getting hurt here. 'Twould make them all liars. I'll just go ahead and leap into the sun now, thanks. By all means, go ahead. You shall burn and regenerate until the sun goes down, at your current power. I just can't win. I would say ye had quite a win this morning. It was amazing. His current plight forgotten, Issei pumped his fist in the air in remembrance of the fan-tits-tick event earlier in the morning, accidentally going past the boundary of the umbrella keeping him safe. He hissed in pain and pulled his burning hand back into it while Shinobu chuckled darkly. As they entered Kuo grounds, the gossip picked up exponentially. Shock and awe could be seen on the faces of everyone the pair passed, culminating in Mitsuda and Motohama. The two would normally accost him for so much as walking with a girl, but the pair was so mesmerized by Kishot's beauty they couldn't even move, much less approach. We're turning every head in school, this is so gonna bite me in the ass. Issei groaned, rubbing his head. Better than a bite to the neck, Kaka. Shinobu laughed out loud at the lame joke and nudged Issei with her hip and good humor. The poor boy was almost knocked out of the umbrella by her sheer strength alone. After readjusting himself, Issei lowered his voice and asked a question that had been on his mind all morning. By the way, Shinobu, what exactly is a devil? Am I, like, gonna have to steal people's souls or something? Shinobu hummed, cocking her head in thought. Truth be told, my master, I'm not certain. I have encountered many of them, but none survived me long enough to offer decent conversation. You're just a bundle of goodwill, huh? Of course. I am nothing but benevolent. Right. In any case, all I know is that devils are creatures of sin and wanton desire, the dark counterparts of angels. They, as well as the thrice damned fallen, are all the offspring of that cursed pest from the Bible. From the Bible? Wait, godlike, capital G. Issei, surprised beyond belief that Shinobu not only confirmed the existence of the biblical god but also cursed him in the same breath, exclaimed probably a bit louder than he should have. It really didn't matter, since his partner was turning every head in the school anyway, but he would rather them not know that he was talking about things most of them considered fairy tales. Fortunately, nobody paid him any mind anyway. Currently, the only thing anybody was talking about was the fact that he was walking in with a foreign supermodel. Indeed, Shinobu confirmed with a curious tilt of her head, not quite understanding his outburst. He'd known about the existence of the supernatural for some time now, so why the theatrics? Twere he who created the first vampire, after all, she continued after a moment, dismissing his surprise as some human thing she didn't understand. Really? Issei asked, perking up at that. He'd learned a bit about vampire history from her, but Shinobu was a woefully incomprehensive tutor. Aye, the traitor Judas. But, 'tis a long tale. I shall tell it to thee another time. For the moment, I shall simply escort ye and relish the gazes of thine classmates. How wilt thou explain me, I wonder? I'll just tell everyone you're my hot girlfriend, Issei answered, grinning wickedly. They shan't believe a word, Shinobu retorted, turning her nose up in disdain. What is the phrase? Out of thy league. 'Tis an understatement, methinks. Ouch, Issei grumbled, upset that he could never beat the vampire in a battle of wits. So, getting back on track, who's my new master exactly? Learning his lesson from the previous outburst, Issei spoke under his breath so someone with vampiric senses could easily hear him, but no one else would ever have a chance. But Emil, if you wish it so, Shinobu answered bluntly, not bothering to quiet down in the slightest. Okay, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but who are they actually? The one with red hair. Wait, what? Issei stopped in his tracks, forcing Shinobu to pivot and turn around with the umbrella so he wouldn't immediately ignite. Ria's Gremory is my master, Issei whispered furiously, a wicked grin on his face. Shinobu shrugged. I know not her name. She has hair like blood and breasts not nearly as magnificent as mine. I got resurrected by the prettiest girl in school. Issei was almost shouting now, but still no one heard him. They were still too focused on Shinobu, if they were even watching. Oh? I didn't know she possessed such a title. Well, I guess at the moment you're the prettiest girl in school. He made to continue walking, but this time Shinobu stopped in place. He looked back to see the ancient vampire lord looking away with an uncharacteristic blush. Am I? What about me? What about you is pretty? What specifically? I mean, it's not anything in specific, it's everything. From your bouncy golden hair to your smooth skin, the shape of your eyes, your lips, and of course your figure, perfect beyond compare, not to mention the immaculate proportions of your arms and legs. There's no question that if Leonardo da Vinci were alive today, he'd paint your portrait in place of the Mona Lisa. Cease. Shinobu slapped Issei on the back, which, at her full power, actually knocked his spine entirely out of place. He struggled not to scream while his vampiric healing fixed the damage, and to any outsiders, it would have just looked like she pinched him on the back, and he recoiled. Did I say something wrong? Geez. Thou didst not. Not a single thing. You're the oldest tsunderer on the planet. I shan't deny the charge. They both continued walking, and once they finally reached the doors of Kuo's old school building and the shade of its roof, Shinobu tucked the umbrella away, or at least that's what the student saw. In reality, it had just been part of her flesh in the first place, quite like their clothes were. Thy master bid me bring you here once you awakened. I imagine she awaits inside. Awakened? Wait, how long was I asleep? A fortnight. What? I jest. 'Twas merely a day. Thy body, once resurrected, needed time to adjust to being a devil. Then, naturally, I made you a vampire once more. Oh. I sent several people inside. Ho? Shinobu sniffed the air, then chuckled darkly. One of our ilk is inside somewhere, though not nearly as strong. Issei had the same sense of smell she did, but not nearly as much experience. He could smell everything she could, but couldn't identify even a tenth of the things she could. There's a vampire in Kuo. 3, counting we. Touché. They entered the building, supposedly the home base of one of the clubs Issei had heard about, the Occult Research Club. It was said to have 3 of Kuo's prettiest girls, as well as the prince Issei hated with a passion. They walked up a flight of stairs, Issei in front of Shinobu, and came up to a set of dark brown Victorian-style double doors with a lit candle on either side. Smells of incense. Is that what that is? Yeesh, it reeks like one of those shops in the mall where they spray perfume in your face. Issei knocked on the door, awaiting a response. Come in, answered a girlish voice on the other side. He opened the door. Seated at an ornate desk on the far end of the room was Rias Gremory, with a Keno Himejima behind her. Kibayudo and Kaneko Taoju sat on lavish twin couches, beside each other on one across from another that was empty. Kaneko was eating a donut, and Shinobu's eyes were immediately on her. Hi, Issei said with a half-hearted wave, unable to really form a coherent sentence when faced with 3 of his school's idols. Hello Issei, hello Miss Hirtenderblade, Rias Gremory said, waving. As they entered the room, she gestured for them to sit. She actually goes by Shinobu, Issei replied, after seeing Shinobu had no intention of answering the girl herself. Ignoring everyone, Shinobu sat down on one of the couches, and Issei moved to sit down beside her, only to be rather forcibly seated on her lap instead. She wrapped her arms around the heavily embarrassed Issei and put her chin on his head, looking like a mother might coddle her child. Aw, you two are really cute, Akeno cooed, something in her sparking at the sight of Issei like that. Ria smiled, then immediately jumped to the heart of her reason for calling them here. I'm Rias Gremory, a devil. These are Akeno Himejima, Kaneko Taoju, and Kibayudo, all also devils. She gestured to each of them as she spoke, and they all bowed in turn to the pair. Issei, as of about a day ago, you, too, are a devil. Rias rather abruptly sprouted black bat wings from behind, and each of the other devils in the room did as well. Issei felt an odd tingling in the small of his back, and he also ejected a pair of wings. He struggled to turn and look at them, but he was rather hindered by Shinobu's embrace. Slow down what? He asked, shocked not just by that revelation, but also by Ria's complete disregard for any kind of explanation, the girl simply skipping right into introductions, as if he knew exactly what she was talking about. I hate to be a stick in the mud, but what exactly is a devil? Seeing his confusion, she slowed down just a bit, frowning. I know this is a lot to take in, but surely since your mother is a vampire, you must be pretty acclimated to the supernatural already. My mother? Issei asked, confusion all over his face. Is Miss Shinobu not your mother? Rias seemed taken aback, examining the pair a bit more closely. What? No. What gave you that? Issei stopped short as he realized the position he was in, being held like a baby in the lap of a woman who looked to be almost 27. Never mind. Anyway, no, Shinobu's not my mom. Oh, wow. In that case, you guys are really cute, Akeno giggled, her entire view on the relationship dynamic changing in an instant. Kiba actually blushed, which made Issei want to puke. His entire being was like something ripped out of a fluffy BL novel. I see, Rias answered, now thrown for a loop. Issei's utter confusion had been unexpected. She thought that anyone in such close proximity to one of the top 10 would most certainly, at the very least, know what a devil was. Issei looked round awkwardly, sensing that he'd thrown a wrench in Ria's explanation. She'd come out of the gate strong as could be, and now she just had her face hidden behind her folded hands, brows furrowed in thought. "Well then, I suppose I'll back up," she said after a bit, finally deciding how to continue. "A day ago, you went on a date with a fallen angel masquerading as a human. Remember her?" Riaz retrieved something from a drawer on her desk and flicked it towards Issei, who went to catch it, but he never got the chance. He had just long enough to see the faintest hint of Yuma's face before the photograph was eradicated mid-air by an irate vampiress's telekinesis. As Riaz blinked in surprise, Issei blanched. Yeah, I remember," he said, hoping everybody would ignore the reality that Shinobu had just obliterated the picture in a flight of annoyance. "Right, well, to make a very long story short," Riaz said, cutting to the heart of the matter, "she murdered you. You would have died permanently, but come to think of it, I'm not entirely clear on the nature of your relationship with Miss Shinobu." "Yeah, neither am I," Issei deadpanned, and Shinobu smirked. "You were saying?" He wasn't going to explain the last several weeks, of course. Not to somebody he'd only just been acquainted with. Stifled for the umpteenth time during this brief meeting, Riaz rubbed her temple and kept going. "You would have died had your partner not activated the sigil flyer my familiar handed you." "Your familiar?" Issei questioned, thinking back to the day of his date. Someone had indeed handed him a flyer, though he'd quickly forgotten about both it and the person it came from once his date had begun. He recalled only that it had been a strange woman in a bat-like dress. "That baddie chick." "That baddie chick," Riaz confirmed, nodding. "She gave you a flyer with the sigil of my house transcribed on it, used for summoning a devil. It's activated with either blood or strong wishes, and Miss Shinobu activated it with her blood after you died. Thus, I was luckily able to appear and resurrect you," she explained, smiling good-naturedly. "As a devil," Issei concluded, putting everything together. That matched what Shinobu had told him. "As a devil," Riaz repeated. "And, judging from your eyes and fangs, I'm presuming that you're also back to being a full vampire. May I ask how it's possible that you hid yourself so well? I've never heard of a vampire doing something like that." Riaz spoke good-naturedly, like a seasoned politician, and it made Issei feel very comfortable around her, but, at the same time, that was still information he wasn't just going to hand out. Plus, he wasn't quite sure of the semantics himself. He wasn't exactly in a coherent state of mind when the transformation had taken place. It was mostly Shinobu's doing. "Well, it really wasn't something I was trying to do, per se," he answered, trying to remain vague but not seem like a douche at the same time. "I was kind of just stuck like that. Sort of." Riaz, at this point realizing her newest servant was a bag full of secrets, was vexed. She was wildly curious and wanted nothing more than for him to divulge every single iota of their relationship and history, but obviously she wouldn't force him to say anything he didn't want to. She wouldn't have done that in the first place, of course, but it was a lot easier not to when a super predator was coddling Issei like a stuffed animal. That, she found, was a very good incentive not to pry. "I see," she answered, making Issei sigh in relief when she didn't ask any more questions. "Well then, I suppose I'll move on to a broader explanation. How much do you know about the supernatural?" Issei thought about her question for a moment. He didn't know nothing, of course, but he didn't know how much he knew or how to gauge what he didn't know. When it came to the supernatural, it always felt like he was standing on the tip of an iceberg. He could see some, but he had a nasty feeling there was much, much more hidden from him. "I know that pretty much everything I thought was a myth or a fairy tale a couple months ago has turned out to be super fucking real," he said, deciding to come clean about his lack of knowledge. "And that's about it." "That makes this easy, then," Riaz said with a smile. "I'll just start with a brief explanation and give you a thorough one later. Devils are dark mirrors to angels, creatures of sin and desire." "Old style," Kissshot smugly whispered telepathically, reveling in the fact that she'd said the same thing first. Issei deadpanned, but quickly recovered so as not to make Riaz think he was making faces at her. She didn't pay him any mind as she kept talking. "We live in a place called the underworld, and we practice a bureaucratic society that you'll find isn't much different from human life at all. Pure-blooded devils of noble birth are expected to form groups of servants that make up what's called a peerage. Those servants can be anything from another devil, to a fallen angel, to a vampire. So I'm your servant?" he asked, wondering about his place and all of that. "That's right," she answered, hoping he wouldn't react poorly. Although servant has a bit of a negative connotation. "My family in particular, the Gremory, are known amongst devils for treating their peerage as their own flesh and blood, rather than simple pawns. I promise you, you're nobody's slave." Hineko nodded, humming in agreement. Issei looked down at himself for a bit, reminiscing. He'd been called a servant before, by the very same woman whose lap he was sitting in right now. This would be nothing new. But, if he was to be someone's servant again, he had stipulations to make. "I understand," he said, looking back up at Riaz. "And I don't mean to be a dick, but I do have some things to make clear. Of course, Riaz replied, looking concerned for him. His voice sounded almost hurt, as if he was afraid of something. Anything you need. I don't know anything about this devil shit, so this may be way off the mark, but I've been someone's servant before and not asking questions really bit me in the neck then. Am I going to have to do anything fucked up, like steal people's souls or kill innocents or anything? Please don't lie, he added, sounding deadly serious. He almost looked like he was bristling, ready to act in an instant depending on the answer. Shinbu's eyes suddenly looked sad, as if she knew exactly what Issei was talking about, and Riaz became much more curious. But that was a matter for another time, and for now she needed to answer his questions. Absolutely not, she answered firmly. The most morally grey thing I will ever ask you to do is make a pact with someone, and that is only ever a mutually beneficial action. It was at this point that she would have liked to stand up and pat his head as a show of goodwill and to ease his worries, but his head was currently being monopolized as a chin rest by one of the most dangerous beings on the planet. Riaz decided to wait her turn. But, head pat or no, she'd successfully disarmed Issei. He sighed in relief and seemed to deflate. Alright, he said. So what's next? At that, Riaz was surprised. There wasn't any amount of hesitation or curiosity or even anger, she changed the direction of his entire life against his will, and some people handled that extremely poorly. But, Issei seemed almost apathetic about the whole thing. She supposed that was in part due to his lack of knowledge regarding his new situation, but something still felt odd to her. Her new servant was a strange one indeed. Riaz was now ravenously curious. She couldn't help herself. Is that it? She asked. You don't have any more questions or conditions or anything? Not really, he answered, genuinely looking calm now. That was pretty much the only thing I was worried about. I'm already a vampire, so being a devil can't be that bad, right? Plus, you guys seem cool. And super hot. He added mentally, much to the chagrin of his counterpart. Thou hast only just met these women, and already they become the target of thy perversity. Despicable, she remarked in turn, not at all shocked by her master's perfectly predictable predilection towards the female form. Well, that's great, Riaz replied, happy to see he wasn't upset. I didn't even have to tell you about the harems. Issei's world came to a screeching halt. Shinbu sighed, rolled her eyes, and released him from her grip just in time for Issei to leap from her lap, flying towards Riaz. What did you just say? He asked, his eyes wide with excitement as he stood on the other side of her desk. Harems, of course, Riaz repeated, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. She'd heard the rumors about him, of course. He wasn't exactly subtle with his wishes. Would you be so kind as to explain what you mean by that? Issei was nearly panting in sheer excitement, his fingernails digging into her desk. Shinobu vaguely wondered if he'd accidentally break it in his enthusiasm. What a shame that would be. Well, I mean a harem of servants. If you become a good enough devil, you'll easily rank up and you'll eventually be able to build a peerage of servants all your own. Issei gulped hard. And these servants, they'll have to do whatever I tell them to, right? Shinobu glared a hole in the back of her master's head, but he wasn't paying her any mind. That's right, Riaz smiled innocently. Whatever you say, goes. Issei grinned like an idiot, then pumped his fist in the air with a bold declaration. Fuck yeah, I'm gonna be the harem king. Issei Haidu was walking around town, like any other day. It was at this point in the afternoon that he found himself on top of a bridge, and opposite him was a tomboyish girl with shoulder-length blue hair, wearing her school uniform and holding her book bag in a rather cool way behind the back of her head with both hands. Of course, both hands being behind her head meant that they weren't able to do anything else with any amount of quickness. So when a quite abnormal gale force wind struck from the front, she was utterly unprepared to stop her skirt from being flipped up. Everything became completely visible. It was by no means something flashy, however, it was such elegant underwear that the eye captivated by it wasn't allowed to turn away. It was a dark, mesmerizing black. It wasn't suggestive at all, and the area covered was actually quite large. It was the full coverage kind with thick fabric, absolutely nothing lewd, and in that regard, one could say in a normal situation, it would lack any kind of sexiness. However, Issei could feel the dazzling radiance of that extreme darkness. And to him, it was not plain at all. While a normal man might only see black panties, a complex design made with black thread over a black background was embroidered in the center part of it, and Issei's trained eye could see a flower pattern. That pattern, symmetric on the left and right sides, exquisitely made up the balance of the whole underwear, and the central top part of the embroidery was decorated with a small ribbon. Furthermore, right above that small ribbon, her abdomen and belly button were visible. The skirt was so boldly flipped up that even such parts became unbecomingly exposed. He could even see the blouse's hem clearly showing tucked inside the skirt. Issei, even in his infinite perversity, never thought the hem of a blouse could be so amazing until now. And best of all, it was just beautiful that only the front part of a skirt was flipped up. The pure dark of the underwear and, as if boasting a competition with that, her thighs were emphasized by the contrast with the light maroon of the skirt in the background and stood out. The skirt in this situation was like a curtain that highlighted an elegant work of art. Considering her pose with her hands wrapped behind her head, it seemed as if she were boasting her underwear to him. Truth be told, he didn't really know how to outwardly react. His brain had gone into overdrive, searing every single atom of what he'd seen into his mind so he could replay it later in HD. All that mental effort left him with nothing left to actually navigate the situation. I didn't see anything. Issei, having been quite used to being beaten up for looking at panties, defaulted to a common tactic coming to his own defense. Of course, it would have been a better tactic if he wasn't still looking at the panties while he said it, but how could he know that? Oh? You didn't see anything, huh? It was a pretty obvious lie from the start. From about 10 steps away, the girl hopped up to Issei with her feet together like she was jumping with a knee pad. She came to a distance of about 3 steps away before stopping. Quite the close distance. She looked him in the eyes without a trace of bashfulness, sporting an impish grin on her own face, like the current situation was the most hilarious thing in the world. I guess the one day I don't wear spats is the same day Issei Haidu gets a panty shot on me, huh? I didn't see anything. Wait, you know me? What, are you kidding? They give all the girls a PSA to stay away from you at the start of every year. Hey, that's just cruel. Is it wrong? Look at the situation, she said with a smirk. Yeah, that's fair. Issei Haidu took a renewed look at the girl, now that she was pretty close to him. He recognized her pretty easily. She was Kuo's resident weird girl Tsubasa Yura, somebody who claimed to see and fight ghosts. She was pretty normal otherwise, but she acted as if the supernatural were perfectly natural, and that made her a standout. Plus, blue hair. Now that he thought about it, what in the world was with Kuo's lax hair color rules? Could he dye his hair green or something, since it seemed like his class already had a rainbow assortment already? You're Tsubasa, right? Tsubasa Yura. The girl who beats up ghosts. Tsubasa made a strong arm pose, accepting the title with grace. That's me. So what's got you walking around town so late, Haidu? It was pretty late to be walking around town, after all. The sun was setting, and the golden rays cast all around set a lovely glow upon the city. Just bored, I guess. Issei hadn't really expected to strike up a conversation with a girl after such a spectacular event. Normally, he'd be getting the stuffing beat out of him. Did that PSA mention that talking to me is gonna lower your reputation, by the way? Gentleman that he was, he glanced around, worried that someone might see her talking to him. And just a little worried one of the kendo club girls had seen him oogle her. Oh, don't worry, it's already low. And I'm pretty sure I've earned the right to talk to you after your eyes just took me to second base. Am I wrong, or was that description of my panties about 300 words? She nailed it. I didn't see anything. She ignored his plea and kept talking. You know what I think? I think it was Murphy's Law at work just now. I guess I was asking for it, like, since I wrapped my hands around my back my skirt flies up in the front. Normally you'd be cautious about the back, but surprisingly the front is a blind spot. Tsubasa mused out loud, her right hand on her chin, while her left held her book bag against her waist. Yeah, I guess. This was surprisingly awkward. Plus, Issei didn't really know what Murphy's Law was. Well, anyway, the sun was in my eyes, so I didn't really see anything. I'm really not that worried about it. Just accept your panty shot with pride, and I'll pridefully accept the fact that you're going to spank it to me later. Just how blunt could this girl be? Issei coughed, not expecting such a comment at all. Tsubasa laughed, sensing his discomfort. Well, anyway, he said again upon recovering, I'm gonna get going. Not so fast, perv. Uh-oh. Here it came. This was the punishment for laying his eyes on such divine providence. He'd done his best to contain his absolute euphoria at what he'd seen, but somehow she'd seen right through him and was gonna kick his ass anyway. Yeah? Issei stammered, instinctively backing up a pace. Whoa, don't get so freaked out. I was just gonna ask, where are you headed? There's a dangerous customer in town right now, so it's not really safe to wander around all over the place. Dangerous customer? You don't mean a ghost, do you? Issei deadpanned, wondering if she was really as odd as rumors say. Even as hot as she was, if she was just straight up weird, it would be a big turn off. A pretty huge turn off really, even with those toned abs and thighs, the kind you only got from years of martial arts. Don't start describing my thighs while I'm trying to talk to you. Tsubasa snapped her fingers in his face, getting his attention again. I dunno, just the library, I guess. Maybe the bookstore. I didn't really have a plan. Really? You're just meandering around town, then? Not going to hang out with friends or anything like that, huh? None of your business. He turned up his nose in an exaggerated way. So you don't have any friends, then? Hey. I'm kidding. Don't worry, they warned us about the other two pervs. Tsubasa laughed again, at his expense. Geez. Despite the verbal abuse, Issei couldn't help but grin. As weird and blunt as she wasn't really rude and she was pretty cute. And her thighs. Stop it. Sorry. There was a companionable silence and then Issei's mind clicked back to what she'd said. Wait, so who's the dangerous customer you're talking about? Are you sure you wanna know? After all, this is coming from Ghost Girl. Tsubasa tilted her head, waiting for him to apologize. Issei was about to say something along the lines of "You're right, it's probably nonsense, never mind," but before he even could she cracked and told him anyway. Alright, you convinced me. It's a vampire, she said, an excited gleam in her eyes. Issei didn't say anything, he just deadpanned. I'm serious. Right, so you're one of those Twilight fangirls, huh? Twilight is better than people think it is. Issei immediately began to walk away. Even perverts have something of a reputation to keep. Hey, wait. Okay, no more jokes. But that abnormally somber tone, Issei turned back around. Tsubasa's oddly handsome face was completely serious. A vampire? In Kuo Town? That's right. They say she's as beautiful as a goddess, with golden hair and eyes that'll stop your heart cold. No corpses have turned up yet, but it's only a matter of time. You really believe this stuff, huh? She was so serious that Issei almost felt compelled to play along. It's ugh. She just groaned and rolled her eyes, a little annoyed. Tsubasa Yura, at this point in her life, had been met with so many people who say you're crazy or you really believe that. Or stop playing pretend that she didn't even care anymore. She didn't believe anything. She knew what she knew. And she knew that not only was the supernatural real, it was often deadly. And she knew that rumors were often based in some iota of fact, no matter how ridiculous. Putting those things together, she knew there was a non-zero chance a vampire was in Kuo. People could legitimately die. And here she was, trying to help this random pervert not have an agonizing death, and he was calling her nuts too. Okay, look, you don't have to believe me. But can I have your phone for a second? Sure, I guess. Issei was thrown off enough by the sudden subject change that he didn't even object, he just handed her his phone. She fiddled with his phone for a moment, with typing speed befitting a girl of her age, then handed it back to him. What did you do? Issei asked, but he answered his own question with one glimpse at the screen. New contact, Tsubasa Yura, save this contact. But the look of mild confusion on his face, Issei pressed yes. If you run into anything weird, just text me. But, no buts, Tsubasa interrupted him with a hand in front of his face. Let's call it the price of looking brazenly at my panties and not getting beat up. Now that got Issei's unbridled attention. Yes ma'am. Now quick, let's rehearse. Rehearse? Yeah, I'll give you a scenario and you tell me what you do. Issei was only a little weirded out. Great. First scenario. You're walking around alone at night like some kind of creeper. Hey, when you spot a vampire. What do you do? Well, you said she's super hot, right? I see if she's cute. Tsubasa made a sound like an error buzzer on a game show. Wrong. Wrong like she's not hot or wrong like both. Try again. Assume she's not hot. But earlier you said, just do it. Fine. Issei really tried to put himself in a position where he came upon a vampire. He didn't know what he'd do. Especially if she was hot. I dunno. What do you mean you don't know? That's what I mean. How should I know what would happen if I just bumped into a vampire? Oh hey, good evening to you. Your breath smells like a blood bank. Have a nice night. Exasperated, Issei acted out what would happen if he literally bumped into a vampire, simultaneously annoying and amusing Tsubasa. She sighed, not really sure what to do with him. She normally didn't talk to random people, even her schoolmates, but she was having a bit of fun with this one for some reason. You know, that just might confuse them enough for you to get away safely. Well, I think you're sufficiently prepared if you do find the vampire, run away, then text me. And in that order. Tsubasa pointed at him like she was accusing him of something he hadn't even done yet. Okay, geez. Hey, why are you telling me this anyway? Are you just telling every random stranger you meet about the vampire what? Tsubasa couldn't really come up with a solid rationale as to why she'd spent the last several minutes trying to protect Issei. She'd only just met him, but he gave off a vibe like somehow she'd find him at the center of whatever problem Kuo currently found itself in. She could tell he wasn't part of the supernatural, and she was only a rookie ghostbuster herself, but something about him made alarm bells trip in her head. Of course not. But going off of what just happened, I'm 100% confident that if you did meet this supposed beautiful vampire, you'd try to cop a feel instead of running away. At least try to defend yourself. I won't compromise in the face of adversity. That's what it means to be a hero. Don't proclaim such a heroic line while you talk about a literal crime. Issei pumped his fist in the air, striking a pose that had no right to look as cool as it did. Tsubasa sighed yet again, but this time with a smile. This kid was seriously something else. How was it that he was so unpopular? Oh, right. The perversion. She nearly forgot. Okay, well, it's been fun chatting with you. I'm gonna go to the gym and I'd offer for you to come with me, but I feel like I already know the answer. Issei physically cringed at the thought of going to work out with what looked like a martial arts maniac. Yeah, I'll pass. Figured. Anyway, don't stay out longer than you have to tonight. And if by some miracle you do run into a vampire, please don't do anything stupid. Yeah. Issei rubbed the back of his head, looking off into the sunset. His thoughts were a mix of there's no vampire in Kuo, and I'm not as dumb as you think. Hey, perv. Issei turned back around to see Tsubasa with a smug grin. You may not have had any friends before, but you do now. With that, she ran off. Literally ran, at what had to be a record-breaking speed. But I do have friends. Issei mumbled moodily to himself, but was quickly taken off the subject as his memory flashed back to the money shot from a few minutes before. He had a shit-eating grin plastered over his face as he replayed the moment over and over again in his head, walking to nowhere in particular. Present day, being a vampire, was kind of kick-ass. Issei walked along as happy as could be, enjoying the night air to its absolute fullest. The full moon shone down on his back and there was nary a cloud in sight to block its rays. He found himself in a part of the park that looked vaguely familiar, but he wasn't really thinking about it enough to place where he knew it from. Thou art enjoying thyself. Duh. It's such a pretty night. Aye, yet I must admit, I'm a little shocked thou art so carefree. Have thee no qualms about living as a devil? 'Tis not something you can change. Well, Ria said devils don't have to eat people, so I'd say it's a step up. And we have a while before we get hungry, so I thought I'd just enjoy being a vampire again for a bit. Issei, sensing her thoughts, was quick to assure her he wasn't torn up over being a vampire again. Just like the first time, he wouldn't be angry about it at all until he felt the urge to eat. Last time that it happened, it hadn't ended so well, and he'd only barely been able to regain his humanity. Shinobu was silent. So I guess we just stay like this a couple days and then go back to how we were. I suppose that could be best. She hesitated slightly, seemingly having other thoughts. How we were had gotten her other half killed, after all. Would it really be so bad to stay as at least a half vampire? For a matter of survival, if nothing else. She was broken out of her musings by Issei continuing to chat. I wonder what Rias will say. Since devils are supposed to be strong. After their little meeting, the other members of Ria's peerage had left and the two spent a large portion of what normally would have been a school day teaching him about various aspects of the devil world, including his new position as her pawn. About that, I may have an. Issei and the woman in his shadow both stopped abruptly as they felt something odd. He looked up to see a purple radiance spreading downward over the area in a dome shape, sealing them within. What the hell? A barrier? Be on thy guard. Well, this really is unfortunate. A low, gravelly voice announced itself from behind Issei, walking in from a dark tree line. The vampire was easily able to make out the smallest details of the person even in complete darkness. It seemed to be a middle-aged man with short black hair and dark blue eyes, wearing a pale grey trench coat and a lame fedora. Even from a substantial distance he smelled like cigarette smoke and musty old buildings, and Issei struggled not to gag. You're running into me, that is. Oh? This one isn't even on the paltry level of the last one. Do as you will at our full power, his light will cause you no harm, through the heart or otherwise. It will hurt though, she added with a grim laugh. However aloof her words sounded, Issei detected a sharp hint of worry through their bond, like she was a little afraid he'd go and get himself killed again. Another fallen angel. Likely, Issei asked under his breath. The man was approaching slowly, giving Issei plenty of time to look him over. This one also had his wings hidden, a sign of deception, according to Shinobu. They did this to appear more human, according to the vampire who had elf ears for some reason. Like Yuma. And probably as murderous. Coming back to the situation at hand, Issei finally spoke up. Nice to meet you too, I guess. Indeed. My name is Donosik. The man tipped his hat, but he didn't sound very friendly. His angry eyes betrayed his true feelings, and, weak or not, Issei was suddenly wary. I'm Issei. What do you want with me? Do you know where you are? His question ignored, Issei felt a little stifled. The park. For every step Donosik took forwards, Issei took one backwards, not really wanting to get into a huge fight. He would if he needed to, but it would make a mess. Really? You don't even recognize the spot you murdered Rainer? The Fallen's voice took on an angry tone as he accused Issei. As the boy caught up with what exactly he'd been accused of, he realized this Fallen had the wrong idea. It made him a little mad. Murdered Rainer? You mean the same Rainer who asked me out on a date and then just when I was getting to like her, she killed me, that Rainer? Issei yelled in response and could feel his normally nonchalant partner becoming angry too. You were just human trash. You weren't even worth the sacred gear she killed you over. A fight it would be, then. Just like that, with no further conversation, the Fallen released his wings, shooting forward with all the speed he could muster. Sacred gear? What the hell is that? I haven't the faintest notion. The two vampires leisurely conversed in the span of time it took for the adversary to draw near. They were operating on a level much higher than him, even mentally, and so it was trivial to talk that much in such a short time. I will have my revenge. Donosik roared out as he finally drew close, then reared back his right hand and plunged forward with a spear of blue light. Issei effortlessly dodged just as it moved to hit him in the chest, leaving Donosik looking around frantically. He hadn't even seen the boy move and had now lost sight of where he was. Over here. Donosik turned to his right just in time to catch a haymaker to the face. He was sent flying backwards, crashing through into a pretty sizable tree with an audible snap. Issei wasn't sure if the sound had come from his back or the tree and didn't really care. His dorky hat was knocked some feet away by the force. The fallen angel lay moaning on the ground as he cupped his hands around his shattered nose. Blood dripped from his face and it was clear to see he was no longer fighting. Just like that, it was over. How? What are you? Donosik, his earlier cocky attitude gone without a trace, had the fear of God in his eyes as Issei approached. I'm a vampire, dipshit. You couldn't tell. Issei flashed his fangs and opened his eyes a little wider, giving Donosik a clear view of the goods. Oh God. Donosik rolled over onto his side, groveling with his hands out towards Issei, in a feeble gesture meant to keep him away. Don't eat me. He put up an absolutely pathetic display of pleading for his life, making Issei cringe. What dude, seriously? You talk all this game and then can't handle even a single punch. That's so lame, man. He was embarrassed on the fallen angel's behalf. If you didn't really know who you were fighting, should you really talk so much shit? Probably not. But, in Donosik's defense, a vampire was nigh undetectable to the untrained eye. They didn't radiate power like dragons or certain other supernatural races, and if one wasn't searching intently, they might completely miss the obvious signs of one's vampirism. That is to say, slightly pale skin, elongated teeth, red eyes, no shadow not in Issei's case. No reflection, all the normal stuff. Other than those things they were human, for all intents and purposes. Of course, in Issei's case, he wasn't human anymore, he was a devil, which is why Donosik had engaged him in the first place. I'm not gonna eat you, so can you quit freaking out? Jeez. Issei retrieved the man's fallen hat and tossed it down to him, prompting the fallen to look up at him with surprise. I'm not gonna eat you, Issei reiterated, but oh, would you try to kill me? Kind of a dick move. You killed Rainer. You're a stray devil. 1. No I didn't. 2. I probably should've. And 3. A stray. Not really. Or at least, I don't think so. I can assure you he's not. Both Issei and Donosik turned to see the glow of a red magic sigil some feet away, with Ria's grimoire at the center. Prez. Oh, hey. This guy tried to kill me. Issei pointed sheepishly towards the pile of fallen angel quaking at the foot of a tree. Ria's was still wearing her school uniform, but somehow she made it look as hot as a supermodel. I saw. You handled yourself quite well, I'm impressed. Ria's patted his head as she complimented him, lightly ruffling his hair. Issei blushed and immediately sported a dopey grin, drawing a small amount of ire from his shadow. And as for you, Ria's came close, standing menacingly over Donosik, my servant has chosen to show you mercy, but the next time you cause trouble for the Grimoire House we won't be so lenient. Take care who you pick fights with in the future. Her entire peerage suddenly assembled behind her, leaving Issei wondering where they'd come from. He hadn't heard anything or seen anything, but then again, he'd also missed Ria's giant red teleportation circle, so that wasn't saying a whole lot. I graciously accept your generosity. With those parting words, Donosik collected himself, buried any thoughts he'd had about revenge, and took to the sky. The purple barrier he'd put up vanished along with him, shattering like glass and falling down as glittering motes. After he'd left, the peerage turned their full attention to Issei. They all seemed kind of surprised, not having expected that kind of strength from their newest family member. You're really strong, huh Issei? Akeno asked with a giggle, an odd glint in her eyes. I didn't even see you move when you dodged his attack, that was incredible. Kiba had a bit of a bewildered look on his face, but his smile was genuine. The reek of blood, Kaneko offered with her normal deadpan, but that was a pretty good punch. Haha thanks, guys Issei just stammered, not really knowing what to do with all the praise, especially when it was coming from 3 people he barely knew, not to mention 3 of Kuo's idols. If thy head swells anymore, it shall likely pop. Is Miss Shinobu with you? Rias asked, kind of surprised Issei was by himself, given how clingy the elder vampire was before. She hadn't let Issei out of her sight the entire time Rias had talked to him, which had been the better portion of the school day. Yeah, Issei pointed towards his shadow, she's right here. Normally I wouldn't have a shadow, but this is how we get around without drawing a ton of attention. I see. Well I was worried you may be in danger, but I see that's not the case, Rias shrugged, looking pleased with how everything turned out. Why don't we all go ahead and go home, now? It'll be a busy day tomorrow. Everyone started to get ready to leave, but Issei interrupted them. Actually, can I ask you something? Riaz turned back around, smiling. Of course Issei, what is it? What's a sacred gear? Riaz looked surprised. She hadn't mentioned anything about that in her talk with Issei, and he obviously didn't have one, so where did he hear the term? It's an artifact of power bestowed on special humans. A sacred gear can be anything from an extra hand or a god-killing spear, but where did you hear about them? I don't think I said anything. That Frolan dude said something about me having one, and that's why Rainer had to kill me. Shinobu doesn't know anything either, and I'm pretty sure I don't have anything like that. Is that right? I see. Riaz immediately began to think. If Issei had a sacred gear in addition to being a full-blooded vampire, he could very certainly be the most powerful person on her team, beating even the other sacred gear-wielding vampire. Well, it's possible the Fallen simply mistook your relationship with Miss Shinobu for the signs of a sacred gear. But, since you were born human, it's definitely inside the realm of possibility. We'll talk more about it tomorrow, okay? Sure. Issei was still a bit bashful. His time with Kissshot had certainly helped him get better at talking to beautiful women, but it was still something he struggled with. Especially when the woman in question was Ria's freaking Gremory. Issei sported the dopiest of dopey grins. Are you going to be out for a while? Breaking out of his definitely not perverted fantasies, Issei was a little unprepared for that particular question. I'm not sure. I just like the night time, so I was walking around for a bit. This kinda put a damper on things, though. I bet. Well, if you are going to be roaming the streets for a while, please do be careful. Even though you're my servant, it's easy to mistake you for a stray devil, as you've just seen. And also please try to keep your feeding to a minimum. The last thing we need is vampire slayers getting called to this town to kill you. He didn't really even know how to start responding to that. A. There were already vampire slayers in this town that he'd had to get rid of. B. He wasn't going to feed at all. C. Was she really going to be so casual about him having to eat people? Not that he would. I wouldn't worry about that. I don't really feed, since I'd have to kill someone. Kill someone? Riaz was obviously surprised by that. Yeah, you didn't know. Isn't there another vampire in our group? Riaz hadn't really told him about the other vampire, but Shinobu could smell it, and Issei connected the dots. Well, yes, but he doesn't have to kill anyone to feed. He just needs blood bags every now and then. Haka. From within his shadow, Shinobu burst into laughter at the thought. Were it so easy, anyone could be a vampire. He must be a halfling, like the boy who took one of my legs. Episode, a half-human half-vampire vampire hunter. Quite the character. So he's not a full vampire? Issei guessed out loud, since Shinobu was obviously the resident expert on vampirism. That's right, he's a damper. Halfling. Daywalker halfling. Some of our strengths, some of our weaknesses. Kaka, I would quite like to meet this damper. Shinobu laughed, and Issei got the vibe she might just bully him. Yeah, our diets are a little different. Let's just say I won't be feeding at all, and I'll explain everything tomorrow or whatever. Issei sheepishly rubbed the back of his head, not really wanting to go more into detail. He didn't know how the group would react to learning he needed to eat a human whole if he wanted to feed. Riaz smiled again. Works for me. Be safe, she said, and they were gone. It was a little odd how quickly the park had went from several people to empty again. Issei simply resumed his aimless walking around, ecstatic about how he was now going to be friends with Ria's Gremory, Akeno Himejima, and Kaneko Toju. And Kiba, he supposed. Begrudgingly. The next morning, it's so hot. The morning sun bore down on Issei like a monster, but he wasn't aflame. Or at least, he wasn't literally on fire. He certainly felt like it. Was thy own idea. I accept no responsibility. Out of more curiosity than anything, Issei had suggested that he and Shinobu try to test their maximum level of tolerance for the sun. He'd lowered their vampirism to a level just low enough to allow them to walk under its rays, but it was by no means pleasant. He'd done so because he was walking to school again, because according to Riaz even vampirism was no excuse for poor grades. You represent the Gremory house now, she'd said. Do your best. Shinobu, of course, had objected at first, saying something along the lines of I can just walk you again, and obviously Issei had been a tad bit opposed to that. He was already going to have to explain himself to Mitsuda and Motohama for showing up to school with what looked like a foreign supermodel the day before, and he didn't really feel like being the object of everyone's attention again. So, Shinobu, in the form of a teen Issei's age, was hidden once more in his shadow while he walked. Out quite a distance in front of him, Issei could see a familiar silhouette. Narrowing his red eyes, he used his vampiric abilities to zoom in it. Surely enough, it was Akeno Himejima. As if noticing that she was being watched, Akeno turned around to face him, then upon realizing who it was, offered a wave. Issei waved back, still a little awestruck. Akeno stopped where she was, seemingly waiting for Issei to catch up. After a moment of speed walking, he had. Good morning, Issei. Good morning, I guess. You guess. Something wrong? Akeno looked genuinely concerned, like an older sister might. Well, not really. It's just hot. Issei looked like he was laboring to even breathe properly under the harsh light and it made Akeno feel a little bad. She'd forgotten he was a vampire unlike the one she knew, who was entirely unhindered by the sun. Would it help if I made it cloudy? If you made it cloudy? What? Ifufu, welcome to the world of magic, Issei. Akeno glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then tucked her chin and recited some words Issei couldn't really understand. She lifted her eyes to the clouds and raised her arms skyward, and within several moments the sunlight was blocked by several gray clouds. Whoa, that's so cool. Issei was beyond impressed, and it had most certainly made being outside in the daytime infinitely more tolerable for him. The last time he'd seen true magic had been when a certain vampiress had thrown a fireball at him, so it wasn't something he had a lot of exposure to. I can teach you some basic magic, if you like. Seriously? That'd be awesome. He practically had stars in his eyes. Ifufu, I'm glad you think so. I'm happier in the club, Issei. You seem fun. You think so? Thanks. For sure. And I don't know if you're nervous or anything, but you don't need to be. We're all super nice. That made him a bit more nervous. They walked in silence for a bit, which made Issei a little on edge. He knew he could be a little awkward and he hoped he wasn't making her uncomfortable. Also, she was stupid hot and he was absolutely stunned that she was walking to school with him. And she smelled so good. Lavender incense, like she'd been at a shrine, and vanilla, like she'd just baked something fresh. It was intoxicating. Thou art truly miserable. Shinobu was just mad because she smelled like blood and violence. And shampoo. Hair down to her ankles, you know. So what all did you and Riaz talk about? She had you in there for a while, Akeno asked. She was telling me all about devils and rate games and evil pieces and stuff like that. Rating games? Yeah, that's the one. She also talked about the angels and fallen angels. You must not like fallen angels very much, huh? Given what's happened in the last few days. Akeno looked a little crestfallen, but recovered fast enough that Issei didn't notice. Well, they definitely aren't my favorite at the moment, but Shinobu is the one who's really pissed. It took 3 donuts to keep her from finding their hideout and eating everyone inside. Is she with you? Yeah. Otherwise I wouldn't have a shadow, remember? Oh, that's right. I keep forgetting you're a real vampire, sorry. No worries, you're hot. I mean fine. I mean no worries. Akeno giggled, which was music to Issei's ears. Very smooth. Thy harem will be falling over thee in no time at all. You shut it. Issei stomped on his shadow, prompting a snicker from Shinobu. Is she talking to you? Huh? Oh, yeah. Wow. She's pretty old, right? It must be really cool to talk to someone who's seen so much. Well, it would be, if she could remember even what day it is. Curse thy name. 'Tis Friday. It's Wednesday. Ah. Shinobu fell silent. But yeah, it is pretty cool. She's really smart most of the time. Akeno giggled. How long have you guys been a couple? A couple? Are you not? I just assumed, seeing how close you guys were. No, we aren't a couple, Issei said with a strange amount of conviction. We're just close. Oh, I see. So what you're saying is, you're available. Wooheh. Issei's brain short-circuited as Akeno cutely tilted her head, a seemingly innocent smile on her face. I'm kidding. For now, anyway. You're kinda cute. If Issei blushed any harder, he'd look like a tomato. Really? Gee, thanks. Hey, you guys. Issei and Akeno turned to see Kiba approaching from the side and a grimace was immediately plastered on Issei's face. Oh yay, it's Prince Golden Nuts, Issei mumbled to himself. Good morning, Kiba, Akeno said, waving. Good morning, Kiba waved back. How are you feeling, Issei? How am I feeling? Alright, I guess. Why? Kiba started walking alongside them, to the right of Issei, who himself was to the right of Akeno. Well, you did get attacked last night. Just wondering if you're still all good. He spoke with such sincerity that it almost made Issei feel bad for disliking him. Yeah, I'm fine, thanks. Issei was a little peeved that his alone time with Akeno had been interrupted, but he didn't really show it much. Thou art suddenly quite the socialite. I know, right? Issei asked mentally, it's kind of weird. The 3 of them talked about random stuff until they arrived at school, upon which Issei was immediately the subject of every single male and female present. Are you kidding me? First he comes with some hot model, and now he's with Kiba Cakes and Lady Akeno. Is he supposed to be cool now? That bastard. Geez. Something wrong? Akeno asked, sensing his discomfort. You guys can't hear all that gossip. Oh, yeah. You get used to it after a while. I promise, Kiba assured him. They reached the entrance to the school building, and both his senior devils both went separate ways, leaving him by himself to weather the glares of everyone on his lonesome. Issei, you prick. Without an instant of warning, Issei caught a wild haymaker in the face, not even having time to react before he was sprawled out on the ground. Underneath him, his shadow stirred, but he was quick to mentally assure Shinobu this was nothing to worry about. Now, Mitsuda, let's allow him to explain himself. Issei's two equally pervy friends, Mitsuda and Motohama, had tears in their eyes. Mitsuda, a muscular bold boy, had just decked him in the face, while Motohama, a bespectacled nerd with a rather terrifying scouting ability, stood back. But he's frontin'. That may be, but Issei's our buddy. Let's give him a chance to clear his name. Would you show up to school with that hot tie yesterday? Would you show up with the other hot tie today? Any pretense of diplomacy was dropped as Motohama started shouting accusations. Issei, smirking, picked himself up off the ground. Gentlemen. I'd be happy to explain. That blonde woman, from yesterday. They both went wide-eyed. Yesterday morning, I was rolling in her double D. If ye value thy manhood, it would behoove ye to cease. Issei stopped his gloating in its tracks, sensing he was about to grievously offend the modesty of his other half. Ahem. I mean, she and I are very close. His new sentence was not much better. You bastard. It didn't matter much anyway, as Mitsuda and Motohama were both on him in an instant. End of the here. So that's it for today's video guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.